You were like 28 years in the engineering, but only 6 years into gaming.
I ended up coaching basketball just to help pay the rent.
Crazy things happening in the market.
We are a success story in a dark time for the industry.
What are the ideal core skills for a software engineer?
Somebody who can really learn and is not afraid of making mistakes.
When you're receiving resumes, what are the 5 major things?
That's my secret weapon to how I grow and work effectively.
It's like,
Get hired.
hi everyone, my name is Ninel Anderson. I'm CEO of Devoted Studios and I'm your host at Get Hired, a new podcast which is supposed to here support people, especially in these challenging times that we're having crazy things happening in the market. We are having a very different episode today. Normally, as you guys know, we're talking about art, but today we're going to be talking about engineering. I have an amazing guest today with me, Serge Knystautas. Hi, Serge.
Hi.
Before we dive into what you're doing right now, I actually want to learn a little bit more of you getting your first job as an engineer. Was that scary? Did you know where to go, what to do, or were you like, I'm cocky, I am gonna get my first job, no problem?
I had no idea what I was doing. I had a technical undergrad degree and then I got an MBA because I wanted to be focused a little bit more on the business side of things. And then I got out and just started sending my resume places and just got rejected. And I ended up coaching basketball at a local gym just to help pay the rent. And eventually I was just networking with people and got a couple independent contractor jobs, and that ultimately led me towards starting my own consulting business a couple of years later, but it was very disorganized, very humbling. I had a friend's uncle who worked at Oracle who looked at my resume and told me he saw nothing special. It was really difficult. I think it's really hard to get your first job. It was a messy process. It was just getting to know people who had similar tech interests, and then when they had a project come along, they would reach out to me, and that's ultimately how I got little contract jobs. But it was not a smooth sailing. One of those contracts turned into a full-time job, but then a year later I quit and started my own consulting company. So I'm kind of a beat to my own drum, if you will.
I know that a very interesting part about your career, you were 28 years in the engineering, right? Some really big number, but only 6 years into gaming and very successful. All the companies are top notch, very intriguing. Coming from the software, how did you get a job in gaming?
I had sold my business to private equity after a culmination of 20 years of running a business in the software industry. And I was both so burnt out that I never wanted to look at another tax return or healthcare plan or all of the stuff that is really painful to deal with as a business owner. At the same time, I've been going 1,000 miles an hour for decades, and so I couldn't sit still. And so I was sitting at a WeWork trying to just learn some new technology and doing things that wasn't related to work. And a friend posted on LinkedIn that he needed a 6-month contractor for somebody who knew Java to manage one microservice. And it was amazing because I knew my friend, I hopefully could get the job, and then I didn't have to figure out what I wanted to do with the rest of my life, but I had something I could go back and do. That was the player preferences system at Riot Games. They needed somebody to manage that. And so I started just by doing basically what I already knew how to do in the general tech industry for a Riot Games, a very large company. And I immediately fell in love. It was everything that I loved about the culture of my company, but I didn't have to worry about all the other headaches. I remember I would fly out once a month and get to know more of the campus and the people there. And the second time I was there, they had a hackathon. And in this 48-hour hackathon window, somebody had composed a musical with 4 pieces about the minions in League of Legends. And I was just blown away by the creativity, and the opportunity to be around people like that just I was sold. So I somehow convinced my wife and 3 kids to move from the East Coast to Los Angeles so I could continue my career at Riot Games. My whole brain was put in a blender because the purpose of what I was doing was very different. And it took me really, I would say, a year and a half just lost trying to figure out what was going on. And I went to a GDC in 2019 and I saw all of the innovation in the industry, but also so much more of like the business side of it and understanding like where things are going. And I remember I had friends on my team at Riot who were laughing at how excited I was at the GDC about all the different vendors and all the booths and what this group was doing and what that group was doing and what these salespeople were doing. And it was, I think, really where the light bulb started to go off about, okay, this is how I build software and this is what I'm serving. In a different situation, it'd be this huge demotion from like running a 40-person company to being a senior engineer, but it was something that was like so refreshing to my career and just like recharged me and invigorated me in a way that I never could have asked, never or hoped for.
You've made a brave decision.
Let's dive into gardens. Tell me a little bit more about what you guys are building, mostly from the company perspective, like the team culture. Like if I am an engineer that want to join Gardens, what would I be expecting? What is the cool perks, the good atmosphere, the crunchy vibes? What is that? Tell me more.
I would start with the founders. They're a collection of indie devs who have done some really interesting titles. I always like to point to Chris Bell's work on Journey, where he was the lead designer, and Sky, and other types of games which really create different types of multiplayer experiences that I just don't find in most games on the market right now. I always like to tell people we're going to go after kind of like a D&D genre. It's like a fantasy genre. The art on the website is what we're looking to create. In terms of what we're looking for, we do favor people who are rather self-motivated. It is, like I said, a group of indie devs who started this, so they're people who are naturally very scrappy, very hungry. They just want to get a bunch of stuff done. They're really super talented, so it's really kind of a pleasure to work with them. And so I want people who are really excited about making an interesting type of game for players and really collaborating. And from an engineering perspective, I want to find people who are often have dabbled in the design, maybe have like an MFA degree, or generally have some design aesthetic, because this is actually the most technical group of designers I've ever worked with. Like I would say all of them know Blueprint. Some of them have comp sci degrees. It's rather amazing to see a bunch of designers who are not just willing to collaborate, but often meet on the same page with the engineers. And so I want my engineers to be able to reciprocate that back and really have design ideas and iterate with the game.
I need your ideas, your intuition, your passion.
You guys have a very, very, very ambitious plan, right? It's one of the ambitious projects of the last year. What is the size of your engineering team right now, and where do you guys need to be?
We are looking to stay rather lean for a while. We don't want to grow dramatically. I want to say we'll have about a 10-person engineering team for at least this year. We're still figuring out when exactly the game will go live. So I imagine we'll maybe be twice that size by the time we launch, but that will be probably more for less gameplay features and just sort of general things that you'd need. We're trying to outsource whenever possible, so we're not going to build our own platform or launcher or all these different things. We really just have a group of like a dozen gameplay engineers who are really going to focus on making something special. We are a success story in a dark time for the industry, and we are trying to make sure we don't let that go to our head and act like we can spend a whole bunch of money. Trying to keep the team a little bit leaner right now. I have hired 2 people this month, and I hope to hire a couple more people later in the year. But it's tough. I know so many people who have had games shut down or studios shut down, and it's a tough time for the industry.
You and I are going to have a very tough time doing business together.
Tell me a little bit more about the interview process. And just imagining over the course of the last few years, the engineering was a lot of written tests where like, hey, write this function, or like, how would you solve this problem, and da-da-da-da. And now you can just ChatGPT and it will give you all the answers. Did your interviewing process or testing process has changed?
Our interview process is greatly focused on posture and culture and then some analytical thinking. Since I arrived, we didn't have a coding test. That's something I very typically see, and I think historically I would have put that in place because that's kind of what you need to do. You need to make sure engineers can write code. I don't know if that's the right skill to look for going forward. I have been coming up with different ideas on how to do this. I think my favorite example or approach that I want to use is to do more of a code review process. So I will present them some code. It will probably have a couple bugs. I'll want to be able to see if they can explain their thinking, see if they can collaborate with it. Can they talk about how that code could be better without being cruel? I really want somebody who can collaborate and think analytically and get the answer from AI or make the answer better from other people or make other people better, as opposed to who can get something compiled that fits some issue. So it's still evolving because I see what's possible now with Copilot or SourceGraph, that I'm not just going to use my standard playbook of adding a coding testing phase. So one thing that's fortunate, we're keeping the team pretty small so I can do the first line interview. And I've always been pretty good at understanding how people analyze problems. To me, it always comes down to what do you think is hard? And that's really the best tell for me, to tell what level of complexity. And then I can dig in to understand how much do you really know in a lot of different areas.
I am now 100% adding into my interview process a question, what do you think is hard? Because it's like, because like the more you're talking, the more I'm asking myself, like, if somebody asked me this question, what would I think is hard?
Us gals have it hard. Have it hard, 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 hard.
You picked up on the whole what is hard. The other thing that I like to ask people is how do they learn? I think that's so important to anybody, but definitely an engineer in this day and age. You're constantly presented with stuff that you don't know how to tackle. And the more you've made progress in understanding how you learn and what your tendencies are, and you've paid attention to what works and what doesn't, I always like to ask people, what's your learning style? How do you learn? Tell me about something you've learned recently. What are you excited to learn next? I asked the question a bunch of different ways, but I want to see how conscious people are at being a student, being self-motivated and driving towards that. I hire people that are just going to get better and better if I do my job well. And so if somebody is aware of that and knows how to make themselves better and better, that's like the most exciting thing for me. That I could just like follow their coattails and be supporting wind to help them realize all their potential. That's like, to me, my dream as a manager is to help people grow.
You know, when you're receiving resumes for engineering roles, right, and you guys are an Unreal team, like, what are the 5 major things that if are there present in the resume, you're like, I love this, let's move forward?
First off, I look to see if they're describing problems is technical challenges or project challenges or player impact. I will always pick somebody who's able to explain what they did for players over how hard a technical problem is that they solve. That's just my values. I want any engineer focused on the impact for players instead of excited about solving really hard puzzles.
And you see that on resume?
Yeah, you can read the about section, or if they ever... Some resumes will put bullets into what they did at different jobs, and some people will say how they rewrote some feature or they did this, and other people will say, I helped launch this feature or I was able to deliver this ability for players. Secondarily, there's some very high-level tech that I look for. So for us, we're an Unreal game. I want to make sure that you've had some professional experience developing Unreal. It's just a big learning curve getting used to that game engine. So that's another area where I actually do kind of use the keyword analysis and just sort of seeing, is this person have time shipping an Unreal game in some capacity? And then the third thing I do is I look for intangibles around initiative and leadership. So especially if you're coming out of college, I look for people who was vice president of some extracurricular activity, or they played a sport and did something impressive. Like, the more types of experiences and the more people ended up in kind of leadership roles, or they were taking initiatives and just doing things on their own, that always appeals to me, because I'm looking for people who want to tackle uncertainty and look before they leap kind of thing. So that's That's a set of intangibles. Even if people write a long resume, I don't care. I really look for somebody who ends up doing a bunch of different interesting things instead of just like the most amazing pedigree in schools and stuff. I also really look for diversity. So much of why I started my own business and why I wanted to do my own thing and where I learned all my leadership was from my mom. She was a single parent working at IBM in the 80s, which was really the pinnacle of poorly run hierarchical organizations. And so I saw how a single parent mom was treated in that place. And so I always took it as a very important mission to look for diversity and think about like the different types of environments that people have grown up in. A lot of it comes back to thinking deliberately about where you're sourcing resumes from, because there's some schools that have different levels of diversity, and so you can end up falling into situations where you're going to a school that's got one group very highly represented, and you need to be deliberate about this. So that's an area where it's nuanced. It's not like it's a clear point for or against, but it's stuff that I really try to look for and advocate for whenever possible.
When you were at Palia, you guys ramped up from like 25 to 70 people on the engineering side, right? And you were probably going through insane amount of interview processes, insane amount of like resumes received. How at such volume were you able to like cherry pick the biggest diamonds?
For me, the way to achieve that is a really deep partnership with the recruiting organization. So I feel like if I can get them to understand what I'm looking for, all these intangibles I've talked about, they hear my initial pitch, but then as we go through and they show resumes or they show candidates, or candidates go through a couple rounds and then we drop, or maybe that they end up get hired, I want to constantly give them feedback on what did I like about this candidate, what did I not like, what did we find out during the interview process that either confirmed or ruled somebody out. One of the most important jobs as a director of engineering is become best buds with my recruiting team, because they're the ones who allow me to take this kind of mess of words in my head and ideas of what I look for in a candidate and actually get results out of that. The first month I was there, the VP of people came to me and said, all of her team is asking, why is Serge talking to us? I think he doesn't know who we are. And I'm like, no, I wanted to know every recruiting coordinator, every recruiter. I wanted to know everybody in that organization. And then I got all my engineering managers to have that deep relationship. So we did weekly syncs with all the recruiting team and the engineering managers. And if there were any questions from the recruiter, I made sure my engineering manager explained what that team needed and just go through that in more detail. So to me, that's my secret weapon to how I grow an org effectively.
I actually have a tip for you. What I found effective working with recruiters is actually when I receive a ton of resume, I actually do screen recording and I walk them through my thought process, what I find interesting in those resumes. And we found that kind of like, oh, this is what you spot and this is what, and this, and like, hey, we'll compare it to this one, and it actually allowed to kind of mimic the thought process and create the synergy.
I will try that out. That sounds really cool.
We have a couple users that send their questions to our Discord, and one of them from RJ, what are the ideal core skills for software engineer for each level of seniority?
I'll go through it rather quickly. For me, what I look for in an associate or junior is somebody who can really learn and is not afraid of making mistakes and is very communicative so they can go get help and unblock themselves. For a mid, I want them to be able to just tackle features and deliver results and just hone their craft. By the senior level, I want them able to lead a team, become an expert, start mentoring. By the time they're a lead, they need to be able to handle very ambiguous decisions and start to tell me what I need to be worrying about, and otherwise just take care of the problems that I don't have to. And then the principals I hire, I just want to sit down with them and say, tell me what is going to go wrong over the next year, and then we'll talk about that, and then they go fix that for me so I don't have to worry about those things that are coming down the line. So to me, those are like, it's a level of like going from learning to expertise and leading to being the tip of the spear ahead of me so I can just focus on running the organization. Yeah, those are my 5 levels that I kind of think about, and it's very different phases and different skills at each point.
Love it. I think we have another question from David. And I worked on a distant group project for a college exam. Is it worth listing it on my portfolio? Actually, is it worth listing projects for college exams at all?
I think if you can talk meaningfully about why that project was important to you and what you learned from it, you should always list projects. I don't think you should list projects just to say that you did something, because I think college resumes often look like a soup of 40 different technologies that you worked with, and that's not really impressive to me. I really want to understand the motivation and what's impactful to me. So list more what's important and what you really learned from than just like a laundry list of what you did.
Right. I love that. And the last question from Benny, which emerging technology trends do you believe are most impactful for our industry, and how should we prepare for them?
I think LLMs and generative AI is such an innovative space that I think people should just stay on top of it as much as possible. It is changing so dynamically. I don't think that there's a single solution, and I think we have no idea what the specific use cases are right now. So I'm reluctant to say exactly like what you should go learn, but there are so many new videos and articles coming out and different AI startups. Just follow as many of them as you can and see what they're doing and see them. Some of them are going to succeed and most of them are going to fail, but watch that and how that process works about how the innovation happens. You will have the advantage that you don't know how things are solved right now, so you'll be able to actually think more creatively than the people doing it in a lot of cases. And I think that's going to be the superpower of anybody coming out of college or newer in their career.
Well, Serge, thank you so much for coming. This was amazing. I hope that creates opportunities for other people. Everybody who is watching can either up their hiring skills or up their hireable skills. And together we can build a better industry. So thank you for coming.
I'd love that. Thank you, Ninel.
Bye.